In the last video, we showed sharpening the chipper knives. In this video, we're showing how to remove, sharpen, and reinstall the shredder knives. The guard over the rotor drive pulley is getting removed for access to the knife shaft removal hole in the sheet metal. You can see the hole to the left of the drive pulley where the belt's hanging out. Before I remove the lock bolt from the knife shaft, I'll mark one side of the spacer that the bolt's in. If that spacer is installed backwards, one end of the shaft will stick out past the rotor ring. In this case, I can leave the spacer in place, but many times the shaft might get launched out or the spacers drop, so I marked them anyway. The retaining bolt uses a 3/32 inch Allen key for the bolt and a 3/8 inch socket or wrench to remove the nut. There is a hole in the back of the cabinet to be used for removing the knife shaft. I use a piece of welding rod to push the shaft out with. I haven't had any of them be sticky or hard to remove so far, so the welding rod works just fine. I remove each spacer or knife as I push the rod out, and I place it on the floor in front of the machine. I keep them in the order of which they came out. Some people like to take photographs of them with their camera, and I guess that's all right. It's just my hands are always dirty and messy, and I don't want to mess up my phone. Here's a close-up of a knife. You can see what look like teeth on the long edge. I relate these to be more like serrated knives, such as a steak knife. The hills and valleys catch the debris and rip it apart, which is, in my mind, justifies the idea of shredding things. You can see the damage on the right side corner of this knife. That's what rocks and hard debris do to them. I hold the knife in a vise. I made some wood jaws to hold the piece without the metal of the vise crashing down on the knife. I use a 5/32 inch round chainsaw file to deepen the individual grooves on the knife. I'll file until the belly of the groove reaches the back side of the knife itself. Next, I'll use a flat file and clean up the back side of the blade. After that, I'll turn it over and check it and refile the valley if I have to. And I work my way through each knife on the shaft. When I've finished with all three knives on this particular shaft, I reassemble them back on the shaft inside the rotor. I haven't found any easy way other than to lay on the floor in front of the machine and reach around underneath the engine, and I'll push the shaft in while reaching into the main area there and putting the components back on the shaft as I push it through. I install the knives with the edges all facing the same way. The problem spacers are the ones next to the middle and end plates on the rotor. There isn't much room to hold the spacer and push the shaft at the same time. The end one can also be a problem, especially because of the long reach between your left hand at one end trying to put the spacer on and your right hand on the other end trying to push the shaft through. last problem for the install is finding the mount hole for the knife shaft. I can usually turn the spacer enough to see a part of the hole, and then I can use a welding rod to line it up. Then I put the bolt in and put the nut on and tighten it all up. Then I get to turn around and start all over again on the next shaft. Once I've got all the knives taken care of, I can grease the rotor bearings. There are two, one on each end of the rotor itself. I grease the drive side whenever I have the pulley guard off. The chute side can be done anytime. One important thing to remember is that the bearing only needs about one pump from a lever type grease gun. It might take two, but you're risking pushing out the seal on any more grease than that. The belt guard is a straightforward install. I have added flat washers to it so the nuts don't bite into the holes on the guard itself. The big thing is just not to forget to put the thing on there. Before I reinstall the outlet screen, I turn the rotor looking to make sure I tightened all the holding bolts for the shredder knives. I set the directions of the knives on two shafts in one direction and the other two shafts on the other. If you look closely, you can see that the designers positioned the knives spread across the distance of the rotor width. All the knives have an open rotation, none in front of or behind the other. I also like to check that the rotor doesn't feel loose from side to side. Everything here looks good. Installing the screen only takes a couple of minutes if the inside of the machine and the slot have been cleaned out. Fit the top edge of the screen in the slot, run the bolt in the hole, and screw the nut on. I've had this machine for several years now and was just thinking that I'd never checked the air filter. It's kind of a mess, so I have to clean up the housing, blow out the paper and foam filters with air pressure, and then get some new ones ordered for the future. Finally, after all that work, I always fire up the machine and check its operation. The engine started well, the drum spun up with minimal vibration and noise. At full throttle it sounds good. That's enough to tell me it'll work fine next time I want to use it. I'll turn off the gas, throttle the engine down, disengage the rotor, and let the engine run out of gas. The machine will sit in the garden shed until it's time to make chips and mulch again. Thanks for watching and stay safe.